doesn't want to experience more joy? And there are actually ways we can make that happen. I'd like to show you some pathways to more joy in your life. Hi, I'm Katja Cahoon. I'm a psychotherapist and yoga teacher. Now, most of us want to experience more joy in our lives, and sometimes it can feel really, really difficult. I want to outline 2 conditions for joy, 2 different pathways to joy, and 2 things that reliably bring more joy. Before I do that, I also briefly want to talk about mental health and that there are certain mental health diagnoses or conditions that make it really difficult to experience joy. In particular, depression has a criteria or diagnostic criteria called anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure or joy. So when it comes to depression, really joy isn't just a matter of choice or of doing practices every day. And that's a little bit the stigma around depression, right? We get told, hey, just do this and you'll be happy, just snap out of it. But it's not so easy. So I want to say this up front with a lot of compassion, because if you are experiencing depression, these practices might not be so easy. And I don't want you to feel guilt or shame over not being able to do it. Well, let's get back to the 2 conditions. So number 1, we have to be present to experience joy. You're going to say, well, duh, of course. However, that's not so obvious because most of us spend a lot of time in the past and in the future, right? So we're ruminating over the past, we're thinking about it. Sometimes that can be pleasant, right? We're recalling a memory. And sometimes that can be very unpleasant when we're thinking about what we've done wrong or what we should have done better or things like that. And we're also spending a lot of time in the future, planning, preparing, thinking about what's going to come next, looking forward to the next thing. If I'm on vacation, I can be happy. If this is happening, I can be happy. And also, of course, worrying and being fearful about the future. So anxiety, for example, we talked about depression and anxiety. This future worry can be very pronounced. So mindfulness is obviously a pathway where we practice being present so that we can experience joy. Because joy happens in the small moments a lot of the time, in the present, right? This can be as small as somebody smiling at you or your child or partner or pet doing something cute. It can also be larger moments, but again, to really enjoy that, let's say a big success at work or accomplishment, we have to be present and not think about, okay, what's next, right? Because that is the tendency. Related to that, condition number 2, we have to develop the ability to be present with everything. And that includes the pleasant emotions, sometimes called positive emotions or situations, and also the unpleasant ones, sometimes called negative. Right? The tendency is to want to numb out or push away what's not pleasant. The problem is that we can't selectively numb. If we numb everything. So we also numb the ability to feel joy, gratitude, accomplishment, happiness, all those very pleasant emotions. The other challenge here is that we have a little thing called negativity bias. So our tendency is to feel more drawn toward the negative. That's for survival reasons, but when it comes to wanting to experience more joy, that really is a challenge. So in order to work on these conditions, these 2 conditions, I want to suggest a little exercise for you. Pick a day, and during that day, notice very consciously everything that isn't pleasant, everything that isn't joyful, everything or anything that creates an unpleasant state, a so-called negative emotion, an unhappiness, whatever it might be. And really pay attention. Be your own researcher and research object where you're observing with a little bit of friendliness, kindness, a little bit of that curiosity, curious detachment of what is leading to unhappiness in your life. And this will help you build that muscle of being present with the unpleasant. Because now you're starting to observe it, you're going to see patterns, you're going to see, oh, somebody said something and now I'm feeling bad. That's interesting. And if you do this a few times, you're really going to start to see the patterns. And you know what? Knowledge is power. Once we can see it, once we can name it, we can tame it. Second, pick another day and now really pay attention to everything that is joyful and pleasant and happy and makes you feel good. And in this way, you're also becoming very conscious of that, and you might realize that there's actually a lot more in your life that brings you joy. It might be very small, and you're amplifying joy and you're countering negativity bias. So you're training yourself consciously to focus more on the positive. 2 pathways to joy. Number 1, childlike joy. Remember playing in the summer rain outside if you grew up in an area where that was possible? Those are some of my happiest childhood memories of damming up the rainwater and, playing in that and getting dirty and muddy. Do we do this anymore? Most of us don't. And so bringing back that childlike joy is really important. Dancing in the rain, dancing in your living room, singing while you're driving, whatever brings you joy, board games, watching a funny movie. I remember when I went through a divorce 12 or 14 or so years ago, maybe even longer, and it was a very difficult time. I got a list of the 50 most funny movies, and I went through them and watched them because I wanted to counter all the difficult emotions that I was experiencing. Number 2, doing something meaningful. Getting engaged in a cause, being creative, being of service, doing something that is meaningful. And by the way, raising kids or working in a profession and giving it your all is meaningful too. Now the challenge is here, and that brings us back to the 2 conditions, is that whenever you do something meaningful, you will experience some unpleasant emotions. Sometimes there's a setback, there is a creative struggle, let's say, or let's say you're engaged with supporting the environment or social justice causes, right? There's also a lot of bad news and unpleasant news. So that's when the second practice of being present, being able to be present with everything that comes is really helpful. However, meaning leads to joy. Meaning in and of itself is very satisfying and really important for us human beings. If you want to know more, read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Amazing, amazing book. So doing something meaningful and very often the process of doing that and sometimes also the outcomes bring incredible joy. Last, 2 things that reliably bring more joy, and there are many more. I'm having to keep this short because I could talk for half an hour, but 2 things. So first of all, time in nature. Most of us know this, but we kind of forget, right? And even if you live in a very urban area, you can create a little backyard oasis, or you can find a park, or you can get out on the weekend. But nature is very healing. In Japan, there is a little thing called forest bathing. And that is prescribed to people who suffer from depression. So they get sent into the forest. How amazing. So this should be something physicians or psychiatrists prescribe here in the US. So that's obviously very, very powerful. And the second one is spending time with a loving mammal. And I say mammal because for some people it's not humans, it's their pets. I have 2 dogs and a cat, and they're an immense source of joy for me because they are so playful, so in the moment, and so loving, right? I leave my room for 5 minutes, I come back, and my dogs are like, oh my God, where have you been? It's amazing to see you, right? So spending conscious present time. And of course, for many people, it's whether it's a significant other or children or friends or a friend group is a source of joy, of connection, which leads to joy, of these small moments of shared laughter, a meaningful conversation, or other things. Not even playing together. I remember game nights with friends and how much laughter there was. And hopefully, we're sort of at the end of the pandemic. This can happen again. I hope this gives you some inspiration. Please subscribe. Let me know in the comments what's working or if you have other pathways to joy that work for you. Thanks so much.